I don't have the music on the thing yet, so. Hey, welcome to the 12 Cent Treehouse with a abbreviated cast tonight. I'm Sean McLaughlin, writer, producer, animation, live action, and stuff. I'd like to say my video Last Night of the Twilight has just passed 103,000 views on YouTube, and I'm very proud of that. And joining me, as always, is the lovely and talented Scott Collins.
Lovely, no, talented.
Hi,
I'm Scott Collins. I've worked on Flash and Marvel, DC, all sorts of stuff, and including, I should have this ready,
Patra, which is available from where?
Through Dark Horse Comics in digital or print material.
So we are down two of our regulars this week. Jeff Johnson has some family obligations, and Stephen Jones is celebrating his allegiance to a different country. So we'll be discussing that with him personally. But today, the two of us, how would you like to talk about getting work in comics, TV, and film?
Well, that's always a fun topic.
Well, doesn't everybody ask you, like, how do you get started in that? How do you do that? Or can you draw a circle without just a freehand circle?
Without any template, yeah.
That was the thing, yeah.
It is one of those eternal questions because you always have newer fans coming in all the time, every year, that come up to shows or whatever else going on, and they want to know how to go in. It's funny to me that you get that question more of how do you break in versus how do you do this job. But yeah, that is like perennial question forevermore.
What is the difference between, to you, what's the difference between how do you break in and how do you do this job? Because I never thought I would have a problem doing the job, and that was untrue. But
well, actually, that was one of those things where when I went to the Kubert School, it was brought up. It was part of one of the lessons that we had in a class, but we didn't have a dedicated class to it. And in hindsight, maybe they do now. We kind of should have had back then, because what we're going to be talking about in the types of breaking it is really so much of, even if you can't necessarily sell yourself and be that kind of a businessman, you have to be able to have these connections with people that you're going to be working with. You have to show them that you're a level-headed person who's going to be deadlines or do the job that's required or asked for, or be willing to work as a team so that when change happens and things go awry or whatnot, that you're willing to roll with the punches and still be part of the team and pinch in, even if it's not necessarily your favorite version of the solution to the problem.
And they don't really interview for that. It's just like, they look at samples and say, yeah, let's give this guy or woman, let's give this person a shot. But they don't, I used to, it's interesting you said that, because when I used to teach college, I created a class and taught it called Business Performing Arts, which was, which wasn't just how you get a job, it's how you survive once you get out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in our day, we were just talking before the show that it's different than it was when we started, but it was all connections when I broke in. And I think it was
really only hands-on. Yeah, that was the only way to do it. Now so much more, it seems like at least 50% or more of the game is digital first. Is the companies finding you, or you getting your art out there, or writing or whatnot out there in some sort of digital format so that the public can see it. And therefore, as I understand it, the companies have people they hired now, instead of the people who used to take in samples and look at them and pass them on to their art director or somebody. Now there's the whole section of the company that's literally just scouring the internet, looking for their next Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, whoever.
I used to do that when I was producing Batman and Justice League, because we were always short people. We were always had a hard time finding people that could work in the style. and I would spend hours on the internet. I told someone the story the other day that I found somebody on DeviantArt. I think it was right before Justice League, or maybe it was even Static started up. And I thought their stuff was great. And I followed them around through the internet and stuff. And I found out they were doing porn comics. I thought they were really good. I mean, they were just a really top-notch cartoonist. And they were doing porn comics. So I showed the stuff to Bruce. I thought this guy was a guy. I thought he was great. And Bruce really liked him. So I got a hold of him and I talked to him. And we could not, and this is at Warner Brothers Animation, we could not come close to paying him what he was making doing porn comics. Could not even, not even in the ballpark.
That's how the world works.
Yeah. It was the other thing I found out was that there's way more Simpsons porn than you would possibly imagine.
Oh, I don't need that.
But I used to go out and do that, and I would do portfolio reviews at conventions. You were at the Kubert School. Did they come in and do portfolio reviews there? I mean, that would seem like that would be a big help.
They did. On the third-year students that were graduating, Marvel, DC, Valiant, I think at the time, any of the nearby companies like in New York City or whatnot, they were all, I think, pretty good about coming in and checking out the prospective students, looking at their portfolios, and having a conversation with them about the job and about the hiring and stuff like that. And I think in average that there were at least usually a few of that graduating class that would get, start to get the small jobs and stuff. I and some of my compatriots of the same year started getting work after our second year. Because again, that was when Valiant was opening up. So they needed people, and they are very happy actually to take students or somebody fairly young so that they could kind of train these kids in the style of books that they wanted to do. Because it was led by Shooter and also by Bob Layton. And they had very strong ideas of how you did not do their comic books. So part of their attitude, I think, was the idea that they very much wanted to actually get kids that even if they were a bit rough around the edges as far as their anatomy or some details of stuff, at least they didn't have like 10 years of experience of telling stories a certain way that all of a sudden they'd have to fight with to reprogram you into doing their kind of books.
Yeah, that was always a big problem on the Batman shows, and to a lesser degree on Animaniacs and Pinky, is that when you see a portfolio, especially in animation, you understand that this person has worked on a bunch of different shows and a bunch of different styles, but you want to see something that looks like the show you're working on. It doesn't have to be exact, but you want to see something like it. And there were a lot of portfolios of like really talented people that got turned down because especially when you're in production, I mean, you're spending the first year of Batman Beyond was a $15 million production.
Yeah.
You don't have a lot of time. You've got to move this stuff through.
Everything's always late. That was one of the first things I learned even at Valiant when I popped in there. And that was my first work, was going into the office and literally seeing how the sausage is made. I'm like, okay, he's literally sitting over there with a yellow legal pad and he's writing down the issue of what's going to go on. And then it's handed over here and I'm seeing this person coloring and seeing that person over there inking, and then seeing like editorial involvement saying, is this part done or is it not done? Does it need something yet? And watching him work through that whole process. But knowing that all of it was late, even the first books that they were working on there, and they were introducing new books as I was hired. I think Rye was brand new then. Exo was about to come out. I think Shadow Man and stuff was later. But anyway, any of them that were brand new at that time, it was a start going like, okay, yeah, we just got this new book approved. And it's already 3 months behind work schedule on the whole system. So everybody quick, we got to go. And that's no different, I think, for Marvel and for DC, as far as I've considered all during that time. And I'm sure it's the same or even worse at TV.
Oh, it was crazy. The last show I worked on was the development of Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, and I got laid off literally because I told the vice president we need $50,000 so we won't be behind once the show is finally greenlit. And he's like, the show's not greenlit, the contracts aren't signed, we can't get the money. And I'm like, So you want the show to be late. That's what you're telling me.
Yep.
And you can't. And it's the second biggest entertainment company in the world, and you're telling me we can't find money for storyboard artists. I have trouble believing that.
When I was first offered the Flash comic by the editor, there's some quibbles back and forth on my end from the creative side of it. But one of the best things he actually did do for us in the book was before, or as Jeff was signing on to Flash, the editor set up a 6-issue fill-in story before our run started. And it was a little bit kind of a hit and miss, I think, as well as the smart decision. But it led us into being like at least 4 months to sometimes being those 6 months ahead, because I wasn't slow either. And Jeff Johns, of course, wasn't slow. So once we got the job and we started running, we used to be the golden boys in the DC editorial Wednesday meeting when they were sharing around what all the books were doing and how late all the books were, as they usually were. Everybody was mad at us because we were 6 months ahead. I'd never had that before, where I'd literally finished, I think, 5 or 6 issues of Flash before the first issue hit the stands. So I was working in a vacuum for those 6 months going like, I don't know. And I've never had that before or since. You're working maybe 3 months ahead, and then you get feedback from fans or different people about what's going on with the book because it's already been published.
Did you have any problem because of other things going on in the DC universe? Because I was a year ahead on Aquaman, and I had to go back and rewrite a bunch of stuff because different things had happened in crossovers and stuff like that, and I had to fix stuff so it fit the continuity.
Nothing happened with me that way. Jeff was far enough ahead. So with the 6 months ahead that we were, then you got to think of you as writers that you're probably at least 6 months ahead on that with your arcs of what you're planning on in the next year and all those things. So I know there were a couple times he grumbled because there were DC crossovers. And if we would have both put up a fuss, I think we could have gotten out of them. Like there was a Joker crossover or something where everybody was getting Jokerized. But Jeff was willing to go with it within his plans, and I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? I mean, it can't hurt us as long as Jeff comes up with something decent enough within all of it. Roll with it. It can only help us. So roll with it. And ever since like 1965 of Marvel Comics now, it's always more fun for the fans when they see other people guest star, when they jump into the books and you see that crossover and everything. It just gives you that texture, like you actually feel like it's a real place to visit or a real place of people that we'd like to get to know. Again, I think that's a problem more in recent years where I don't think the crossovers and those things aren't as flexible and as fun as they used to be.
Yeah, I was told to plan a Superman crossover in the first 10 issues, and I planned it, and then they scheduled, I think, Batman Returns at that time, and I was told to turn the Superman issue, which I had already written, into a Batman guest star, and I'm like, you that's like a whole different thing, right? You guys are familiar with these characters, I'm thinking.
Literally yin versus yang.
So is that your first professional gig, was the Valiant stuff?
Yeah. Out of the Kubert School, some of my other fellow students had been hired, but they had hired as inkers and colorists and production guys in general while they were learning their skills within that job that they needed. Later on, some of them turned into pencilers, some of them turned into writers and other things too. But Valiant talked to those guys that were hired, and it was because this is part of the getting hired stuff that we can talk about. Those guys got hired because one of them had one of their teachers at the Kubert School who had a direct contact with some of the higher echelon there at Valiant, at Jim Shooter and stuff. And somewhere in that contact, I think Jose Delbo was the teacher. I think he'd been doing something for Valiant before they were doing superhero stuff. They were doing video games and some other things to earn up a real balance of money so that they could launch their superhero line. Anyway, that teacher then had suggested some of his students to go in there. They had gone in, they had gotten jobs, and then because things had gone well, Shooter and Leighton and Don Perlin was their art director. They had turned to those same students going like, do you know anybody else? And they were looking for pencilers and other stuff too, not just some of the colorists and inkers that they had. And I had a decent portfolio, and I knew those guys at that time. So they said, do you want to go in? And I said, of course I do.
Yeah.
And then
So
you still
it's
have to pass the test and that kind of thing of them looking at the stuff, having a nice conversation, be flexible, be open, and be willing to, like, if they want you to start tomorrow, you start tomorrow. If they want you to start next week on 8 o'clock in the morning, you start next week at 8 o'clock in the morning.
yeah.
And that was a in-office job at that point. That was still all very much a bullpen kind of job.
And were you getting a salary or paid hourly or piecework?
I was still paid, as far as I remember, I was still only paid for the artwork I produced. I didn't wind up doing any patch jobs at that point. Right after I came in, they gave me a wrestling story to ink because I also had inking samples, and they didn't have anything ready for me to pencil. Though I was supposed to be penciling right off the bat, but they said, we don't have anything yet. Do you want to start tomorrow? Do you want to ink this job? And I said, sure. And then I did the best I could, but also that was also brand new for me at that point because I had done some stuff, with other students around and this and that, but I'd never worked in an office atmosphere before.
Right.
As a brand new kid. I was 24, I think. And that was nerve-wracking to be all of a sudden in a room with a bunch of other guys working on stuff, and I had to be inking this job, which, on top of everything else, it was a Steve Ditko wrestling story. So yeah, there was a lot of sweating going on when I was inking that stuff.
Did you have any contact with him? No, yeah.
No, he came in the office a couple times to pick up jobs from Jim Shooter or to drop off jobs or whatever he was doing. But we were told pretty much around the office going like, don't talk to him. It may even been like, don't even look at him kind of a thing. Just let him come and go and do his thing.
Levitz was apparently fairly close to him, and Levitz said he's a really nice guy. He's strange about certain things, but he's a really nice guy.
I've heard he's a super, super nice guy, but also shy.
Yeah. It was like, well, those were the, when I was on Animaniacs, we used to get the Spielberg memo when he would come to tour the studio, and it was, don't look at him, don't speak to him unless he speaks to you, don't ask him for an autograph, just pretend he's not there.
Yep. It was almost that same kind of thing when Barry Smith came up to the office too at one point because he was working on Solar for them. And he was handing in, I saw second chapter or third chapter handed in. I saw the pencils and everything. Just beyond gorgeous. But it was pretty much the idea of really don't talk to him. I did have one question because he had just finished Weapon X a year before or something like that. And I had a question about Weapon X and how it ended this and that. And I asked Bob, can I? He's like, okay. You're taking your life in your own hands. But
and did you get your answer?
Yeah. I mean, it was pretty much what I thought it was, but I was just being a stupid fan nerd, whatever, and double checking. So the end of Weapon X was that we had seen pretty much a straight line through. I don't know if you remember, you read the Weapon X stuff, was that Logan was captured at the beginning. We kind of got hints of his background before, Life Found Before, but it was really him just being stuck in that experiment with this small crowd around him of these various good people, bad people, whatever, organizing him being turned into this killer with adamantium skeleton. Except for when we reached chapter 9 or chapter 10 out of the 12, maybe even chapter 11, all of a sudden it switches, the whole thing goes dark or whatever, then comes back, and then it's inside Logan's head, and it's all very dreamlike and all of that. And by this point, he's killed all of the main cast that we thought of. He had been this run amok Frankenstein monster, whatever, that got revenge on all the people that had done him wrong. And then it went black, and then it comes out of it, and then it was almost like a reset. We were in the sequence again of him just doing things, being tested as a mind-controlled killing machine or whatever. And then it cuts again in the ending where it's it seems like he's going to kill them again. Maybe not the same way we just saw, but he's breaking through the door at the end, which all of our scientists and whatnot were behind this door again. But then he cuts away from that, and then he has Wolverine walking away in the snow or whatever it was. So I was like, Barry, did you really kill them? Barry's like, being asked this again. But he said, yes, he killed them. That's what it meant. And I go, okay, cool, thank you, love it.
Yeah.
Move on.
So we were talking about people that we knew, and like you were at the Kubert School and stuff. How important is a network? Because I don't know how to break. I mean, I feel like I've broken in like 3 times, and it's been luck
Right.
every single time.
Yep.
You know, um,
Which is
and
another skill and thing that people should learn is you don't just break in once. I don't know anybody that's broken in once. At some point, your career is going to hit a snag on your own or because of all the things around you and the company changes or something like that. And you're almost going to feel like you need to break in again. One of the first times I met this other professional at a convention, a guy that I'd known around, but I'd never met him or whatever. We finally met and he's like, "Oh, you're Scott Collins." And he's like, "You've had this great career." And I'm like, "Are you kidding? I think I'm on my second time breaking in. I don't know what you're talking about." So yeah, it's something that happens all the time. But to your point about the connections, absolutely. Connections are absolutely key. You could have the best portfolio in the world, and if you have no connections, good luck.
Yeah. Do they still do? Because I used to do portfolio reviews at conventions. Do they still do that?
Last I heard, they still do at the bigger conventions, the ones that Marvel, DC, whatever show up to. But it's even tougher than it used to be. Like you just had to wait in line before when you would go into shows. And you might have to wait 10, 50 people or something crazy, but nothing too bad. Now, as I understand it, there's a lottery. You put your name in for a lottery. They pull out however many they think they can get through and see if they pick your name.
That's so. I was a comic for a while in L.A. stand up, and I stopped doing it because that's how you get your initial stage time. You go to the Laugh Factory at noon.
Yeah.
They give you a number. The number goes in a hat. You come back at 3 p.m. They pull those numbers. Those numbers go on that night, and then you show up at 8, and maybe you go on, and maybe you don't. But it's not like you're not getting the best. You're getting the ones who are patient.
You were lucky to get a standby flight.
Yep.
Which, I mean, that's part of the gig. I mean, in kind of ways, it's what it was when we broke in during our time anyway, was, like when I walked into Valiant, they didn't have the penciling job for me. They said, "Do you want to ink this?" I could have said no. I could have been an idiot and been like, "Oh, no, I'm only going to pencil." Of course not. And there were plenty of other jobs when I first got to Marvel or DC or this or that. It's like, hey, we're going to give you this quirky, maybe really dumb job or whatever, this sideline project or this 8-page or whatever it is. Do you want to do this thing? Well, I never wanted to draw, the Mad Hatter taking a shower, but okay, yeah, I guess I'm going to do that. Whatever crazy thing it's going to be, it's not going to be probably the thing that you wanted to do when you broke in.
It's like Jeff a couple of weeks ago talking about his X-Men issue, and the X-Men issue is the X-Men redecorating the mansion.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm at a point now where I don't necessarily take every job that's offered to me, but I was for a while Dark Horse on Johnny Quest. I was the guy you could call on Monday and know you'd have a script on Friday if you were in deep trouble. And I don't know that was the best look for me because obviously I'm not doing Marcel Proust and Johnny Quest comics to begin with, and to do it in a week is a little bit less. But when
that's one of those things is being able to those times where, and I've heard that from the beginning, going like, oh, got to realize that a freelancer sometimes you do have to say no. You have to do that, but those no's haunt you. Did I break off that connection? Did they not trust me anymore? Was that my moment to make the connection here, to go over there, to go over there? It's like this giant chess match of am I going to get to this over here by doing these rounds? And once you live through any of this stuff going on, you'll see it's like, oh yeah, well, I only met this job because I met this guy, and then that job led to that guy, and then yes, I wound up on the Flash, or you wind up on whatever book, Marvel Team Up or Avengers or whatever it is. That's like a crapshoot how you got there.
Yep. I used to. To me, it's what you're balancing is, do I want to do this job, which will make me a connection and will get me a little bit of money, but I could very well be doing subpar work on this, and then that's what they're going to know me for. Or if I turn it down, are they going to know me as the guy who, we offered him work and he didn't take it?
Yep. It's that is the conundrum for freelancers most of the time, is taking the work. Can I make the best out of that job, even though it's not the job I thought it was going to be, or whichever? Can I get it done on time for the time frame they need it to do? And can I knock their socks off even if this was like the total like left turn job that you never expected kind of a deal. I always tried to pride myself on thinking that I would kept my style open enough so that I could do different things. And I was one of those fans myself where I like Doctor Strange, I like Superman, I like, Wildcat, I like Iron Man, whatever it would be, all sorts of different genres within what we were working in. So I thought most of those would always work. After you get in, then you find people pigeonholing you really quickly. So they're going like, oh, he's just the Flash guy. He's just the Batman Beyond writer, whatever it would be. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of lucky. I came in at the tail end of Over the Transom writing stuff, and I submitted an article to Amazing Heroes,
There you go.
which they published, and then the editor of Amazing Heroes wound up becoming an editor at DC.
There it is.
And enough people dropped out of writing Aquaman, which in 1990 was not a plum assignment. Was He Talks to Fish, and that was lucky because like there were a whole bunch of big name people, including a couple of really big name writer artists who were told, we're in the Bake Off, and one lost the job because they didn't have a telephone. and nobody wanted to call the general store down the street to get a hold of them.
I've heard of a few people like that just stun you, going like, really? Your number is the bar at the end of your street. That's how we contact you?
Yeah. It just, I don't, and it seems more like it's like 1950s cartoonist New York than, 1990s to 2000s to 220s New York. But, sometimes you just have to be available. And that was how I got in. And then that was the same connection at Amazing Heroes is what got me into Warner's. So, I was lucky that way. Now I was also unlucky because I got sort of pigeonholed, as you said. But then trying to keep connections up after that. So, for people who this is called the 12-cent treehouse because most of us have vague memories of comics being 12 cents.
Or close enough to it anyway. I go back to like 20 cents maybe.
Go back to 15.
I got books, I would get the back issues that were that much, but no. Okay. When I was buying comic books, they were like, there might have been 20 cents. What I really remember was that big little, Marvel would do that thing saying, still 25 cents.
Yes. Yeah, it was odd. Those price wars were hilarious and awesome.
Yeah.
But then you have to keep in touch with people and back like right before I got in, everybody had to live in New York, period, or in close to New York, period. That's it.
Yep.
Writer, artist, nothing. There were exceptions like 13-year-old Jim Shooter who's mailing in layout scripts from Columbus, Ohio, or something.
Pennsylvania, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, but for the most part, everybody had to live in New York. But now, so everybody knew each other, and you were in each other's, parent play groups, and you went to the same bars and stuff, and that doesn't happen anymore.
It happens, I think, a little bit, but you're right. It's much more spread out, and people in other countries now and all that kind of stuff. So I think most of it turned into where, yes, when I was up at Marvel and I was in the East Coast, that was the deal, was that you would try and hang out as much as you could with everybody doing whatever it was, so that you were, so they knew who you were, they trusted you, and then when there was something available that they needed somebody, and then you could get your foot in the door of that office or whatever it was. I think it's just one of those things that's transferred mostly anyway, to, digital or to phones or whatnot, doing stuff like, by the time I was in on Flash or anything later, the Keith Giffen stuff later on with Blue Beetle or Larfleeze and stuff, then we would just talk on the phone all the time.
Yeah.
While I was working with those guys as teams on the books, we would literally talk almost every day, Monday through Friday, and then sometimes on the weekend, depending if there was a deadline or something going on. But we would always check in, and then even after times, when we weren't directly working on a project at that moment, for years or whatnot after, we'd still probably talk at least like once a week or so. And that's part of the deal, I think, of the job, is that, you still try and keep as many of those connections going on for your coworkers that are making the books, but then also obviously for as many editors as you can. And that's actually, we were talking about this before we started. That is one of my weak parts of my business acumen or whatever of getting along. I've gotten along plenty of times on luck and stuff, but I do better if I was much better at making connections with editors and keeping those connections and keep making new ones, which is the difficult thing, because
Yes.
as what happens with any of us lasting longer than 10 years or 5 years in this business, editors change out, presidents change out as much as anybody else, writers, artists, everybody changes out. So 3-5 years after you've broken in, half of your connections will be gone.
Yeah, and they're not just moving to a different company. They're leaving the business. They're going someplace completely different, and then you're lost. And then in a way you sort of become old news because they want their stable.
Yep.
I've heard of a couple like really legendary names lately who have pitched projects at Marvel and DC and have gotten like, why would we want to hire you? And they're people who are, you should definitely
Yep.
want to hire them. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah, except for they're looking for that fresh new take or whatever. I mean, yeah, I don't know which way to get around that. The only other thing that we've talked about more that you've done your Twilight, and you're working with Jeff on some projects, and I'm working on more and more projects where, you know, we worked more in creator-owned stuff. This past way was creator-owned, and then Patra stuff was creator-owned too, because that way, you know, all of our skill sets that we've honed all these years are in some ways being rewarded with all of the knowledge that we've accumulated by this point. Whereas in some ways, by the bigger companies, that added knowledge that we have at this point isn't necessarily an advantage for them. Partially because, like you said too before we started, that, you know, most of the companies went all to that direct market, and then some of that became name value. So then the stores recognize your name, and then it either becomes a good recognition of your name or it becomes a bad recognition of your name. And then before they even know it, you know, they're looking at this latest issue by Sean McLaughlin and Scott Collins going like, oh, we can only sell this much of this because this is what we sold before. And sometimes I sympathize with stores a lot because I know what they're doing is really, really tough. But that putting people in boxes like that and not them just going by the material and actually then trying to sell the book gets really annoying. I'm just like, what, should I change my name every like 5 years? Next year I'll be called Bob Rock Comics.
Yeah, I'm going to change my name and start speaking with a British accent. I think that will guarantee me a couple of Eisner Awards.
There you go.
What about conventions and stuff as places to meet people and socialize and stuff? Because I haven't been in years. So does that work or does it work against you, do you think?
I think it still can. And again, you know, it's not the thing that I'm always the best at, but I still do see a lot of people of around my generation that have been working in business for a while. They talk about and seem to do a fair amount of, you know, going out to dinners and chatting with people and keeping contact and seeing what's going on, what's not going on, or any sort of problems coming ahead. And then even more so, I think with the younger generation that have just broken in, yeah, they're very much doing that. I mean, they're doing it a lot online, but then I think they're also very happy for the convention season, kind of like we used to as well, where you can have all the connections you want as far as on the phone or Zooming or whatever else going on, but it's a completely different feel when you're at the same table and you're sharing a drink or any of those things going on. There's a whole different kind of camaraderie that can build up with all that and levels of trust.
Well, they see you as a person as opposed to just the guy who's late on a script or a story or a board or something like that.
Yeah.
So what makes you realize that you have to break in again? Because it took a while for it to hit me that my past credits meant nothing. You know,
it was usually just as simple enough to me that you know, the one office I was working for or something like that, all of a sudden, you know, moved on. And again, it's not necessarily where you have to learn this business that often these decisions really are not based on you. They're not pointed at you as some sort of vindictive thing. There are going to be changes going on because this is publishing, this is entertainment. So entertainment constantly has to change, constantly has to seem like it's growing or whatever else it's going to do to be fresh and get news attention or whatever they're going to do. So there are constant changes going on. When I was on Legion of Superheroes, when I was on Avengers, there's got to be other books too in there where I'd be on it for 6 months or a year, and I think everything's going great. And I'm getting great feedback from the editorial department saying you're doing good work or whatever it is. We really like what's going on. The only way in the old days that I could tell that it was really good and what was going on was that if there was a change going on, they go, okay, this is changing. We don't have this bucket here for you, but we've got these other buckets on the side. We have some jobs for you on the side, or we have this other book. What would you think about trying this instead, kind of a thing? And that's just going to happen. So that's where I know sometimes when all of a sudden things haven't worked out is that even though the editor may have tried, there are times when the editor is going to realize, going like, I can't keep bringing you up in meetings. That's now coming off like it is favoritism or some sort of other thing going on, and that I'm not just promoting you because you're doing great work. You have to make the other connection, so it's not just Steve promoting you at the meetings. That you get Karen, you get Sean, you get whoever at these different meetings going like, hey, I think this guy would be great at doing this book or this, different things going on. So it's kind of like, I mean, and modern corporations work like this a lot, where they don't want someone hanging around for 30 years working for the same big corporation. They want you to not do, one corporation. They want you to jump to the competitor, work there for a while, show that you still have the chops and whatever is needed to be done so that you can run to Dark Horse, you can run to DC, and then you can come back to Marvel going like, yeah, I've still got books I've done over these other companies and they've done well enough.
That's what you just not exactly about the topic we're talking about, but you really hit me with something when you talked about stores looking at stuff and saying, well, this person has sold us this many books, so that we're only going to order this or fewer. And it's such a misunderstanding of what entertainment is about, and I scream this forever, is that the audience doesn't know what they want until they see it. They think they know what they want. They have ideas, but they don't know what they want until they see it. So I understand why stores have to order that way, because it's a business and you have to have a certain amount coming in and coming out. But you also have to keep in mind that something might break out at some point, and stuff breaks out all the time. So something breaks out, and it's never
really the ones that are planned to break out that are actually the breakout ones. It's something that catches the companies from the side going like, oh, like Blackest Night for DC at the time when it came out. That was not the big header. That was going to be one of the crossovers, whatever, but that was not supposed to be their big winner for the year, whatever it was. And within 3 months, they're like, oh my God, this is way by far our biggest hit of the year and crossover whatnot. So all of a sudden, then they were scrambling for all those side projects and extra tie-ins and everything's going on to make it all work. So, it's a valid point of dealing with the business, is that you have to keep punching around to find out, what part of your work is either going to make sales now or hopefully make sales later. And you have to keep doing those things. One of my other issues with my years of being on books is, though I think I'm fairly well respected, I don't have many of those wins, after the Flash or Avengers or different things like that. There's a couple things. There's stuff that got reviewed really well, but if the numbers aren't super high, it's not going to make a difference to editorial and Marvel and DC, whoever, that they're going to want to go like, well, yeah, but what numbers did he sell? And they're going to compare those, because as much as we enjoy this for the entertaining of the business, it is a business. They have to stay in business. They have to make money.
Yep. And part of, I think, looking for new talent is also looking for less expensive talent. Well, that might not be so true anymore, because they're closer with the dollar than they were in the past. I know in Hollywood it's the same, that it's you start looking for younger talent because they're less expensive.
There's a bunch of that. Although I don't, as it is right now, as I understand it within the industry, I've heard numerous reports from people and then articles online that in general, everybody's page rates, everybody's income on these jobs is down. But I think that's also with the idea that in general, Marvel and DC, as best as I understand it, do not seem to be the top of the heap anymore and haven't been for a bunch of years now. Scholastic sells 100 to 1 compared to Marvel DC, and even manga in America still, as I understand it, sells some 10 to 1 in odds. Now, the Absolute Line or different things that all of a sudden break out do really well again. But you got to get the fans in there and buying the books.
Yeah, but the numbers they're selling now are I mean, Aquaman #1 sold 1 million, got
Did it?
canceled at yep, got canceled at 35,000, and then climbed up to 80,000 during my run. And those numbers would make me the hottest thing in comics right now if they were
Yeah.
doing that. And in TV, the ratings are down
Yeah.
across the board. Um, my opinion on that is that ratings are down across the board is because you're programming for a niche. You're not programming for everybody. But
Yep.
other people argue that it's because there's too many other options now. I've got in comics there's too many. There's a ton of options in comics now between independents,
Yep.
self-publishing, Kickstarter, all that.
Yeah, again, that's where I feel bad for the comic book store owners that, have to go through catalogs where they have to go through 20, 30 different publishers at least, and 300 or 500 books a month or whatever's going on. So they're obviously going to, and when they can, they're going to try and narrow their focus to what they think the winners are, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those deadly viruses of seeking the money in those things where it becomes that narrow focus of stuff where for a while, it was a standard kind of comment going around of like, well, how many Batman books is DC going to publish every month? How many NCIS or CIS shows is it CBS going to pull in, at this time? Because it's just they're going with what they think, always get some of their sales that they want to get. But it does wind up harming that brand.
The line.
In the long run.
Yeah, it harms the line, and it harms the brand because they have to keep pushing new material out, and the material becomes subpar at some point.
Which also I have a little bit of a controversial take on the fact that I don't like all the fact that they keep making new versions of their same characters a lot of times. Sometimes, sure, you can, but they do it way too often with way too many characters so that I'm like, yeah, okay, well, you're touting Dr. Doom right now in this or whoever, whatever other character going on. But if you look through the last 5 years of those comic books with this whatever character popping into it, that character is going to look massively different every time. The color scheme may even change. Half the names changes half the time, and they're going like, "Well, we're just doing this like it's skins on a video game."
It's exactly
we're
what
just
it
trying
is.
different things. Yeah, but you're losing your brand. Those skins are because the brand still holds for the game, and people can pick the skins that they want, and you're trying to reach that wide base so that everybody can get what they want out of it. But that's not publishing a comic book. You're not publishing a comic book with 100 different versions of the same book to supposedly reach all these different fans. So if you keep changing Dr. Doom so he doesn't look like the Dr. Doom or talk like Dr. Doom or seem, whatever like him, like you're ruining your brand.
Yeah.
So you're going to put him out there later. People are going to go like, isn't that Darth Vader? Wait a minute, isn't that Dr. Pepper? That's Dr. Doom? Like, what is going on?
Wouldn't you like to be a Pepper too?
Exactly.
So back to I just had a thought that when you talk about showing stuff to an editor and whether they take it or not really has no reflection on your talent, and that's true. I had a friend who was an actor who said, after a certain point, auditions got easy for me because I realized what they had for lunch was more important than anything I did in that room as to how they felt and whether I was going to get the job or not.
So this leads us back to what we had mentioned earlier too, is that there's that perennial question of how do I break in, but isn't always that perennial question of like, how do I do this job kind of a thing. Now we're talking about the actual angle of how you get the job, and that could make or break, whether you actually have a style or a subject matter, whatever that they want to do, or they think they can make money off of and produce this book. That doesn't excuse the part where the person needs to actually know how to do the job, penciling, writing, whatever it is, that they need to know the ins and outs well enough so that they can bring that to the table to then have this, roller coaster, roll your dice chance of whether or not you're going to get this job. And there are people that get the job sometimes that don't know how to do the job. And then sometimes they last 6 months in the industry and are gone because they can't hack it. They actually don't improve the things that were kind of cute when they first started, that were these little mistakes that the anchor was saving or this or that. After a while, get real tired because you can't draw the feet or you can't draw cars or whatever it is.
Well, and
you know how to do it.
Yeah, you have to impress on people coming in that you're There are so many people lined up who want to get in here that if you don't hit the ground running, if you aren't there early and stay late, there's going to be somebody else who's going to take it. And that doesn't mean let yourself be taken advantage of, but it means do the work and
Yeah.
don't, be grateful for it. I was a very ungrateful writer because I thought I knew better. And I did, but I was.
Don't we all?
Yeah. Yeah.
In fact, when
what
I get
about-
portfolio reviews nowadays, I make a point out of refraining of talking about style, because I'm like, your stock could be in today, out tomorrow. I have no idea, whatever else. All I really want to talk about is the basic principles of what you're going on here, and whether or not I even think that it's something that could pertain to. And I always ask them, it's like, well, where do you want to work? What do you want to do? Because that's what I'll have to gear my my review on, is what you want to do. If you've got Howard the Duck in mind, or if you've got Daffy Duck or whatever's going on, if you tell me you want to work for DC Comics, well, I'm going to tell you no right away. You have
Right.
to have the right material for the right project going on or whatever. So I keep it to storytelling or basic premise of, does this whole thing flow or work, whatnot, versus, do you have a Jim Lee style, or do you have a Todd McFarlane style, whatever it would be.
Yeah. And they do. I think developing your own outlook makes you stand out as an artist and a writer more, because when I was looking at portfolios for animation, I saw so many anime ripoff portfolios.
Yeah.
And they weren't like even ripping off Miyazaki or Ozaki.
No.
They were like, it was some minor league thing, but that's great, but if we wanted to do this, see, we would call these guys in Japan that we know.
Yeah.
Because you see, we work with them, so we don't need you to do this. What about?
Well, usually it's always that they're just doing that surface level of copying kind of stuff. Like they're only kind of doing the sloppy surface level of Neil Adams or whatever it was. They're not actually getting the meat of what is in there.
When you start talking to them about structure, like arms are cylinders matching, and the hand is a pentagon or whatever, and then cylinders on it. You start talking about that, and you get this. They don't understand, and for animation, that's important because somebody's got to move that thing.
It's got to be consistent.
When I was a kid, I read a book called The Associates about young attorneys. And I was struck by one sentence in it, which was, there are two ways to become a partner in law. Join a big firm, work your way for years and years and years and become a partner, or start your own firm.
Oh,
so
yeah.
With comics, like, what about just going to Kickstarter and doing your stuff there? I have feelings. I want to know if you have feelings.
I think you can. I think it's a viable option. I don't know that it's going to make you money. I've heard lots of different complicated stories about how Kickstarter works. I think ultimately, as best I understand it, you still have to put your time in. Like, your first Kickstarter is most likely not going to make money. Your second one probably won't make money. Maybe your third, your fifth, as you go along, you'll start, if you have good material, you might start getting enough attention from people so that all of a sudden you could make it profitable and stuff. But yeah, it's a risky maneuver, just because you may have put in enough work to get the Kickstarter going, and then it may not go. And I don't know exactly how in the world their algorithms or whatever's going on, because there's been times when I've known a friend has had something on Kickstarter. I go to Kickstarter and it was comic book stuff, and I'd write in comic books, and my friend's stuff didn't pop up. I'm like, how did it not pop up? And then I did some deeper search, so I'm looking kind of at all the comic books on there, and there weren't actually even now that many, at least in Adventurer or something else kind of comic books. So I'm like, until I put my friend's name in, then all of a sudden it popped in the Kickstarter. I'm like, what the? That's not going to help.
Yeah. So, I did. Yeah. I financed Twilight there, and I fancy that I have a little bit of a name. I mean, I have a couple thousand followers, and
your credits are big.
And I still had to do so much promotion on the Kickstarter to just barely crack it. That it was more than a full-time job doing the promotion, and I have a little bit of a name, so if you're just starting out and you don't have any credits, okay, how are you going to promote this? How are you going to,
you're going to have to, as best as I could, if I was a new guy and that's the route I was going to take, you would have to be the idea that you were burning the candle at both ends. You'd have to have a day job, assuming that you needed money to live.
Yeah.
Even
I
in your
do.
parents' basement or whatever else, you're still going to need food money or whatever money to hang out. But you're going to be working during the day or whatever your job time is, and the time that you should be sleeping and everything else, you're going to have to be putting as much energy as you can into the other stuff, including the promotion or anything of socializing, the media stuff, whatever, and getting your word out there. But assuming that the first 1, 3, 5 of them is not going to sell. And a lot of
Yeah.
guys used to do that back in the day with their black and white independent comic books. It was only the rarest of indications, that the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or something like that would actually become a big hit. At that time, I remember there were like at least 20 or 30 of other independent books that we were even surprised to see in a comic book store that was really only Marvel and DC. You'd wind up getting some of these independents, but they were like dribs and drabs, and that's probably one of the reasons why I didn't pick Cerebus up for the longest time, was that I'd only rarely see it in the comic book store. It wasn't like a regular book, and it certainly wasn't pushed by the store.
Really?
They'd get like 1 or 2 copies. Yeah. They'd get like 1 or 2 copies of it, and it would be gone half the time. I wouldn't have even seen it.
No, that could be. I mostly remember Cerebus from the telephone books, and then and I think probably there's nothing like the Comics Journal or Amazing Heroes anymore. There's a whole bunch of websites, but none of them are run. There's actually a Comics Journal website. None of them cover stuff like they used to, and so you'd get turned on to stuff like Cerebus, or I remember through reading the Comics Journal and Amazing Heroes, I got turned on to Peter Bagg, and you'd find new stuff like that, and that would be like a really good route for someone, do that and do a Kickstarter, but there's nothing like that anymore.
And I remember when we were starting on Flash that CBR and some other ones, they had the community boards and different things that we would visit, trying to get people involved with showing you what was going on in the Flash comic book. But they had news and stuff that was handled a little bit more like news. Whereas I understand almost any of them today, I don't care where they're coming from, they're only looking for those clickbait headlines. They're not really talking about the business as far as like people being in there and stuff like that. Now, maybe I'm missing out. I could be missing out on all sorts of websites that aren't out there, but the ones I've heard of anyway. And you usually at some point, 6 months later or something, the best stuff rises to the top. You think you would have heard of any other website right now that would be really good about news and updating people on the cool things that are going on out there. But most of what I know, it's still word of mouth. Like my son even showed me, about a year ago, there was a book that was called Beneath the Trees. I think all the 6 issues that had already come out, and like the trade was coming out or something like that. So I wanted to pick it up the trade, but it was word of mouth. He heard it from friends. Some of it, I think, it was on YouTube. He was looking at different things about comic books on YouTube, and I think that's where he found it. But yeah, it's still word of mouth is like the number one way to work it there, and sometimes that is just slow as molasses.
Yep. It was really hard for me doing that Kickstarter, and it's been almost as much work when I finally put it on YouTube after did its festivals run. Well, then there's doing a festival run, and there's paying for festivals and getting copies out and stuff like that, and then putting it up on YouTube. I still had to do a ton of promotion to get.
And there's a bunch of that, even with the getting the stuff from Dark Horse or whatever that I've done, getting that into stores and hopefully getting it somewhere. I've heard from stores for a long time now that any of those independent books that are out there, and it almost runs for them these days. Fans really will come in going like, okay, I want to check out the latest version of Doodad comic books, but they're like, oh, but this brand new one that's come out, it doesn't have 5 trades. It's only got its first trade out. I'll wait and see. And they wait for the 3rd, 5th, 7th trade to come out, and then they go, oh, it's got 7 trades out. Okay, now I know it's a thing. It survived. Enough people read it. It's got to be good by now. That's one of the reasons why I think manga stuff sells the 10-to-1 odds and all that stuff, is because it's coming over from Japan. It's already sold $1 billion over there, and here they come over and it's like, oh, it's 52 volumes of the book. Well, this is great. Yep.
And they don't, because they've already sold a ton of copies. They don't need to make that much money on this market, and they're smart enough about it, which American companies aren't. Is that, well, we we were happy with this share of the market because we've already made our big money. So this is just cool. We don't really need to
Yep.
push this. Is the
But
the
also
focus-
America's even a bigger audience. So even if they don't think they're going to get that much out of it, this much out of this pie versus, you know, out of a smaller pond or whatever, I'm sure they're making money hand over fist by what they've been putting in the U.S.
Yeah, no, I'm sure none of them are wondering where their next meal's coming from.
No, but at the same time, it's fair to say though that, you know, that competition within Japan for those people to get those books and get those runs of doing that stuff, those artists and writers and creators over there are killing themselves to try and do that stuff. I think it was a friend of Jeff's. I'm not gonna remember his name. He was an animator though, I think, down in LA with you guys. He went over to Japan for a while. He wanted to do manga comic books. That was actually one of his dream jobs to do. He went over there, and I don't know if he lasted a year or something like that. It was killing him. His health was so bad after that 1 year of going over there and working within the manga system that's over there. He had to come back. He had to come back because he was like, you know, falling apart.
Yeah. Well, and the other question is like, so for the Americans who have to produce like how many floppies to make a trade? What's a trade now? Like 4 issues or 6? So how many?
Yeah, between 4 and 6.
Yeah. So how many floppies do you have to produce, and how do you survive and continue to do those? You know, doing Kickstarter or whatever, or selling them door to door, or going to conventions and hawking them there. Like, how do you survive to do that? Do you get to that point?
And that's what I'm saying. For most of that I can see anyway, for the people that have to survive and do that, including my friend Chris Schenk, he's got 2 books out. He's got the 3rd one done. I think he's just getting around to publishing it now. He's got his day job. He's got his job that helps him pay his mortgage, his rent, his this, his that, his, you know, auto insurance, everything else going on. And he's hoping to, you know, get it down the line so that it could be something and keep building on it. I mean, hey, the story goes around for everybody. This isn't, you know, for just for the no names or the people who have lower profile or something like that. This went on with Mignola on Hellboy. I watched that making of Hellboy, whatever movie of his, and there was a really important part of that movie to me where he was talking about that after he did the first miniseries, it sold okay, and this is when books were selling good. This was like 1993, 94, whatever.
Yeah.
And there were some really good sales in there. So I'm sure in general his sales were great as far as an independent goes. He's like, it sold okay, but I don't know. Maybe I should go back to Marvel and DC and do some more stuff because that stuff sold more or whatever. And he was afraid about it. And like a lot of, you know, wonderful partners, wives, whoever coming in there, his wife apparently was very fundamental or helpful in telling him, going like, no, you wanted to do this. If you want the fans to take you seriously, if you want this thing to win, you're going to need to suffer through this. You're going to need to keep pushing through, do another miniseries. Maybe you have to do 3 more miniseries before it really catches on, which is what he had to do.
Yeah.
At least to his own level of, you know, figuring out what the sales needed to be or something like that to be accepted. He had to go through a bunch of miniseries that sold okay, but not great. And then where'd it go? It went through the roof, but he had to stick around.
Yeah, that's and that's hard. I mean, you know, I don't think people outside who want to get into any of these businesses, especially like acting now, like there's no middle class of actors anymore. Done.
Right.
There's really rich actors and everybody else. There's you know, that's gone. And comics, comedians too. There's no middle class of comedians. But until you do it, you don't know how hard it is to see all your classmates and the people you know settling down, getting jobs.
Yeah.
You know, I like to think they're leading lives of quiet desperation, but you know, they're quiet. You know, and you still have to slug away at stuff like this and drive an old car and, you know, shop at Goodwill.
That's all the periphery stuff around you that you have to deal with, which is hard enough. But there is just the idea of like getting to this page, getting to this one, struggling through. Did I make the right choices to lead to this page and the next page and the next page and on and on? There were points on Patra. There were points when I was working on Adam, point 3. Even there were some tough moments on Pastaways at the beginning where, and I was, you know, a good 10, 15 year, whatever veteran by that point that I was working on those books, I was still pulling my hair up, because that's the other end of it, is that, that we've talked about sometimes, I think even on the show, but I know Jeff and I have talked about a lot, where not that we took it for granted, I don't think, but when we were working on Spider-Man, when we're working on Batman, when we're working on all these things that have been around for 30, 50, 100 years, whatever it's been, we pick out our favorites or different things, or we learn a new topic. Like, honestly, when I was on Flash, I knew some Flash stuff, but I did a lot of Flash research after I got on board. But you're dealing with all this material going like, okay, I'm going to be like Alex Ross. I'm going to take that mask out of this thing, and I'm going to use that kind of boots and this thing over here and this power effect and whatever's going on, and I'm going to make my own version of whatever this good pie is, and present it as that. But you're still working off of those things. You're getting the Kirby machinery handed to you, or the John Buscema horses, or whatever it is that you're going to wind up drawing, right? And building off of that to build your own monster. But on stuff like this, or different things where you're almost starting from scratch, or you're trying to make sure in some ways you're trying the most that you can from scratch. Obviously, there's been robots before. There may have been robot cowboys, different things. But Chris is trying to develop his own version of that recipe.
Right.
With all that stuff. Doing that honestly and pushing it through like I did on all those books, there were times I was in tears. I was like slamming my head against the drawing board, literally going, what am I doing? This doesn't seem to be working. Or, the last 6 pages worked and now this page sucks. What? That frustration of dealing with that and not stopping, but making it through to the end of the job or to the next job or whatever it is going on with it. Man, anybody I meet nowadays who can do that stuff and still have their sanity and still be able to present themselves as a human being, I know it's nothing to the really, the real veterans out there, but for us being veterans in the business in that sense, man, you get full stripes from me. You can do that. You're not just doing Spider-Man for Marvel or whatever else and just doing the same old. You get huge props from me when you can actually make your own book.
Yeah. It's a privilege, I think, and especially Chris and you guys who can write and draw. It's you've earned that, the right to do that, and there aren't many people who can do that. And I read Citizen Cold again this week, and it was a lot of fun, and that's yours,
Cool.
Well, we're a little over now.
I see that.
I hope folks learn.
Blah blah blah.
I hope folks learn something and we're entertained. And we'll be back next week. Jeff will be back with us, and we'll see if we can rescue Steve from the clutches of Ruritania.
Hopefully, we'll get Mr. Jones as well. Yes.
All right. Take care. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.